Hello everyone, this will be a video tutorial on After Effects regarding Project 2 in the experimental animation class, which is the stop motion entity and how you use After Effects to assemble, composite, and deliver that project. This video can also be used in general for other courses if you're early into using After Effects and things are new to you here. So here I have After Effects open. It's a bit of an older version, but I'm just going to focus on some of the similar things you'll have in front of yours. A couple of assumptions right off the bat: that you have used some After Effects before. You've experienced that in your art and motion course, which is essential of getting through some of the projects. You have the composition window up here, the timeline down there. I've already preloaded some assets into the project tab here, which you can see, and then over on the right, standard window usually is where effects and presets go. Spyglass is where you can type in any effect you want to quick list it. If you want a different layout, I know this menu is a little bit off screen, but you can go to the window menu in the workspace and set a different kind of workspace. As I mentioned, I have some things loaded here that I've already grabbed for this demo, and these were provided to me by students. There's some images with green screen in back of it. There's a few sample movies, MP4 comp movies, and our goal today is, one, get rid of the background and show different ways to make disappear the green screen or whatever background, if it's a bright white or if it's a saturated red or blue screen, red screen. Most common, of course, is green, and using the tools here to try to make it transparent so we can see the background through. Then we're going to talk about art direction. We're going to talk about duplication and layering, creating the illusion of depth, creating pre-comps and combining those pre-comps to make a sophisticated composition lasting up to the 20 seconds expected for the project. So you would start just as I had, dragging things. If it's all the folder, you can drag and drop right in the property tab to get all these menus listed. Of course, you can also import assets from going under File. You can't see it, but under the File menu, Import File, and you'll get a bunch of files here. You could import in the project window just the same way. They're already there. So I'm just going to start with this first one a sample student gave me, just called My Movie 1. I'm going to drag it to the timeline. It's going to pop in as a layer. A couple things to start out with. This might be review too. Composition settings. When you opened After Effects from the very first time, you really have to know what size and everything is, and it will ask you at the beginning. Here I'm going a little bit backward, and I'm going to go to composition settings, and I'll show you what I put. This is what you should put, or nearly so, when you first open After Effects. For the preset, I put HD TV 1080 24. You will have maybe slightly different sizes and codecs and presets listed here. Just choose the one that's 24 frames a second and an HD size. This is 1920 by 1080. Make sure the frame rate is 24. If you don't do that, if this is 30 and later you start importing animation 24 frames a second, you'll notice it going faster or slower, and then you're going to have to reset. You would have to go, but anyway, if I didn't do that and it said 30, I would have to go right click, interpret footage, main, and correct it here. I have to put in then 24. That is, if it said 30 in the original composition and I forgot to change it to 24, it's going to play at a different speed than you think. So you can go back and change the composition setting, or you could right click and change it here to make it match. You've probably experienced that once or twice in your life using After Effects. Now, if your footage comes in like this instead of full screen, if it's not HD size already, and likely that's going to be the case if you're shooting on different devices, you'll have to scale it up. We want to master this video in HD size, but we can see that's not quite big enough, or it might be too big if you're shooting with an SLR camera. Well, this one's too small, and in both cases it would need to fit. So you can hit S and scale it up, of course, to have it fit. And try to eyeball it, but let's say it comes in not at a 16:9 or a rectangular ratio like that. Say it comes in square, and that's native to whatever you're shooting on, so it's going to stretch it a little to fit. Then you have a choice of whether you can just scale it. You could scale it there, but if you zoom out here, you realize, yes, you're losing a lot around the edges. Can see that you're going to lose top and bottom, but it does give you the levity to animate a zoom or a pan like that, that could be a good reason to scale it this way. Or you could scale it, if it's the opposite effect, you can create a long type of thing and leave that length and scale it throughout your animation if you'd like. But mostly you want it to fit. There's a tool just to go into layer, and I know you can't see it, but it's going to the layer menu above, and then we're going to transform and then fit to comp. And it'll take any artwork and fit it exactly to the edges of whatever it says in the composition, which is 1080. Now you may have to do that to all your artwork coming in, all the assets, to resize it. Already I'm going to have 20 seconds here. If I want a little bit of more wiggle room to work, and I'm hitting the maximize mountain icon and it's getting me to the end. If I go into composition settings again, and just put a very big number in here into the duration, I'll just put like 99, and it's going to give me a lot of time here. Now I can zoom out and see the space afterwards, and then zoom out and see a lot more room there. Just putting some extra duration on it. Okay, let's get into it. Okay, let's just see what we have right here. Again, I mentioned this is a student sample. Here's a layer, of course. Let's preview that layer because it's not going to play in real time. We can scrub through, and if we play, it's an image that's going to have to catch up in the RAM cache of the machine. So first thing we're going to practice is the range slider, which is this right up here. It's really important. Of course, you know about already, right? You may have used the hot button keys B and N, B as in boy, B as in beginning, and N as in Nancy. So if you hit B, it goes to the beginning of the layer, and if you go click on the end and hit end, it snaps the range slider to wherever you want to be the beginning and the end. See, I'm hitting B and end here, hit B here, click here, hit N, and it just advances the range slider. So those B and N are great to know. And also I, click on the layer I for in, that's the in point of the layer. Can you see how the playhead went to it, jumped to it, and then hit B, and then go to O for the out point, and then hit N. And so those 4 letters are really useful hotkeys. Again, B and N for beginning and end, and I and O to jump to the in point, the very first frame and the very last frame of the layer. We're only going to work with and playback only within the range slider. Okay, so let's just see what we have. Then you're going to hit 0 to play, and in the green area that's catching up, it shows the RAM is complete for the cache for it to play smooth. So if it's all green, it's playing at real time. So this is what we have at real time. Now I'm going to back up a little bit, because if I right click on this layer and say time stretch, you'll see that it says 100 right now. In this case, if I want to double the length on it, I'm going to put the number stretch factor 200. And that's one way you can speed up or slow down any animation that you have. Now we can go to O and then N and play back this longer one that's twice the length. And we can see in green that that's the real speed. It's playing back this animation a little slower. So this is a way you can build rhythm into things you want to make faster or slower. Say some parts you want to, and you didn't shoot it in the original camera work. After Effects, you can really go back and re-script things. All right, now you could do the opposite. If I right click and make it shorter, time stretch, and you put in 50, make it half speed, O, and then N, and then 0, and we're going to see it play twice as fast. So that sort of looks cool at that speed. So you could test things at variable speeds and see which way they look. Please don't have this confused with frame rate. Your frame rate is still 24 frames a second. Composition is 24. You may have shot in 24. You may have shot in 12. That is 12 frames a second if you're using drag and frame. Some people do that so that you don't have to shoot twice, like to chew and put wear on their camera shutter. They could shoot 12 frames a second and then play back 24 frames a second in drag and frame, or come back here and double it so they know what the true speed is. Anyway, I hope that's not confusing. Just the end goal is 24 frames a second, and here all we're doing is manipulating the perception of the speed by changing the layer speed. Okay, so actually what I'm going to do with this layer is make it, I have it timed at 50. I'm going to stop it, and I'm going to make it maybe 80%, a little bit faster. And you'll see what I'll do later to make up some of that time. And this is the speed I'm going to go with. All right, now I'm going to work with green screen and what I said about removing the background. Here, it's really important that we try to distinguish the lighting that's hitting the objects and the lighting that's hitting the background. If you have some bleeding, some of this green coming in and bleeding into the color of your artwork, that's going to be difficult. We're going to use a color range, but you could use key light. There's different types of keying to remove things, difference matte, the different kinds of mattes, key cleaner, as I mentioned, key light, a linear color key. We're going to use a really straightforward and easy thing to implement called color range. And just know that you could have a difficult situation where it's not going to be very easy, and just do the very best you can, considering many people are using some of their own setups for this. Another thing that's going to be kind of difficult are shadows, because that green, of course, the separation of colors, it's going to remove anything that shares that hue of green. Some of these shadows are just a darker version of that same green and might be a little bit tricky to remove. Anyway, you'll see that in your artwork, the more separation of lighting, of color, that you have your artwork, your entity, as far away as possible or lifted. If you have a curved background that's dispersing the shadows, all the better. If you have something that's reflective and really close and picking up the same green as the background and having shadows, it's going to be more difficult. Okay, now let's just try to remove the green. I'm going to go over to Effects and Presets, and under Keying, a tab that says keying. I have one that says Color Range. And remember, if you know the name of something, you could just type it. A lot of things are named color, but if you have a unique part of the name and you just type range, it could pop to the top really quickly, Color Range. And then you just drag that icon, grab and drop it onto the layer, and nothing happened, but it is there, that effect is there, and it's popping now in the Effect Control tab here. Moved over from Project to that, and it has this white preview, and with the pipette, with the plus, you can select areas here on your image that are green, and it's going to cut through it. Now it goes black because the background of the composition is black. If you go to composition settings and you see that the background is black color, you can change it to any color you want. I preferred it for you to stay on black, so I'll just keep it there using the black background by default. If we roll through it, I just clicked very quickly, and in the preview you can see, say, well, I mentioned the shadow might be a problem, and you can plus click the shadow and that might disappear, or it might cause more problems. Now this is getting really hard to see, and it looked like one of our greener spheres disappeared. Well, we're going to try to adjust to find a good compromise for this, but we're going to find another background, because either color to black, it's not very indicative. So we're going to put just a background from the internet, and I just grab the sky, the sunset, and make sure it's big enough that size it's going to cover the HD canvas, and I'm going to drag it into the back. And now it goes on pretty a long time because it's a single image. So what I'm going to do is go to the end of my layer, and then I'm going to click the sky layer that I just put there, and I'm going to hit Shift Command D. That's the same thing as split layer. If you went up, edit menu, and said split layer, it's the same thing, and it just cuts it in 2 layers, and then you just delete the part you don't want. The background floating behind it, and as you know, just in Photoshop, After Effects works top down, so we see what's ever under it in transparent layers or blending layers. By the way, if you hit Shift, I'm holding Shift and dragging, that has any element snap to any other element. So if I want to grab a range slider and holding Shift, holding that Shift down, it's going to snap, make it sticky then. That's really, really useful. I use that all the time, holding Shift if you want something to snap. Here, if it's not perfect, and you can't really eyeball it, because if you zoom in, it could be a little bit off. You'll be mathematically imperfect. So the only, well, actually the best way is to Shift and drag. Okay, and for this background, maybe it needs a little more adjustment. If I hit S for scale, I can scale it bigger or smaller. I can see the proportions don't exactly match. So I might go into Layer and Transform, Fit to Comp. And it's best to go to the hotkey there as well. Just hit Option Command F if you're on a Mac. PC would be Alt Command F, but Option Command F is a shortcut to fit to comp. Okay, zoom in a little bit closer. We don't need that much space on the timeline. You can see what's happening here. All right, it's working. It's cutting the background, but some of our stuff is disappearing, and it went to a little bit too severe. Let's also tone down the background a little bit. It's a bit too contrasty. So if I hit T for transparency, I can turn that up or down if I want. Okay, now I'm going to go to the animated layer here for the movie MP4. I'm going to the effects control. All right, in more detail here, we have the preview here, which we can select with a pipette plus or minus to roughly select the parts that are going to be clear or not. But that's kind of crude. Let's say if we want to grab the shadows, and you can see how much green that's picking up. It is kind of like a whack-a-mole. Some things will just start disappearing you don't want, vice versa. What's a little bit more powerful here in color range is you have these sub-menus: fuzziness, minimum, maximum of LYR, of AUG, of BV. Okay, these have to do with color and brightness of that color, hue of saturation. So if we just experiment in grabbing one of this that says minimum LYR and move it, you could see how it's going to temper the amount of cutoff of that particular hue of the of any pixel. And we have maximum as well, and you could kind of play an experiment with these to try to get the most happiest medium. So really effective was this one, minimum AUG, and here I'm just grabbing and sliding them. So maximum BVB, just swinging back from one to another and adjusting the minimum maximum values. You're going to find some kind of a sweet spot. But because the lighting was not ideal, it's not going to be perfect. You're going to have areas where you're getting transparency through your artwork, or you have more green in your background, and just find the closest you can. And that's why I'm having you use color range and going really deeply into other tools for color correction. Obviously, it's better in some cases where you can reshoot and get the artwork separated in lighting as much as possible from the background and not sharing any colors. But if that's not possible, and even in professional shoots it's not possible to redo, you'll just have to do your best. Here we're getting some transparency through here. Here's another sample a student gave me with artwork sitting inside a really nice looking cyc here. This has a nice smooth shadow move, but the current lighting would be kind of challenging because we have a shadow coming in here. Of course, the background could be much more brightly lit if there's another lighting source here. And also this object and the hand and this object is picking up a lot of the green around it. If you notice, this green right here near the thumb is so identical to that green, it's just almost going to be impossible to cut out without some creative things to protect it. As well, here you see a lot of green coming in. As well, you see very dark shadows, which would be hard to remove. Just do your very best in this case and don't sweat it too much. And we're going to creatively use through experimentation. Maybe we'll just leave the shadows in. And something like this, I'll show you a couple ways. You could just leave the shadows in and experiment and try to use them to your benefit. Here would be another example if you could see a lot of the artwork catching green of it. If there's any way to reshoot or shoot in a scenario where you have the artwork away or lifted off of the screen, or even hanging from a string or something, suspended mid-air, to get it away from the green and not casting a shadow and also not picking up any of the color, it would benefit. And back here we see some of those shadows similarly, and a little yellow cutting on here. We can go back and see what we can do, making some adjustments. You can see how narrow the threshold is. I'm on a minimum BVB and I'm dragging. You can see that I start to get this part of the yellow back, but then it's so similar to the green of the background. It's just within a few pixels, bam, it's coming right back in. So again, it's just the same color. It's hard to differentiate. Someone mentioned, yeah, can you just give the image more hue or make the image more saturated with a color change, a color filter on there before you put in the color range? Yes, you could. It's a little bit of the same thing, because this is exactly what you're doing when you're arranging this. You're changing the color range of the sensitivity of the grab. So the thing is, it's a whole picture. It's affecting everything at once, not just one of these balls. So it's always going to be an isolation issue. Just do your best again. So what I'm doing is I'm going to stop about there. I'm going to leave the shadows in and saving a little transparency prevention here in the yellow one, and allowing a little bit. I'm going to scroll through, see if there's a problem elsewhere. It's not too bad. It's a compromise between all the evils, I suppose. And we have a little bit of green coming in here, which I can also mask out if I want. And I can show you that tool, the pen tool, as well a little bit later. Okay, that is one of the most laborious parts, just trying to get it separated in the background. That's what I need you to do for this project. Now, I don't need you to put a sky or anything in the image in the back. It's just to give a contrast to it. You can leave yours just black, or you can throw something on there, but it needs to be on another layer, because in the later projects, we are going to create a background to replace it back there. Okay. So before we mess with that more and go on to other things, let's do another image to drive that home a little better. Let's go to the project, and we have another different type of a entity with green screen background done by a student at home. Okay, right here, and remember we can hold shift and drag, and it's going to stick and stop to the end point of the other ones. And when we build in After Effects, we can build in a stair step. Don't have it go up and down and confusing. You can build it downward or up. I think the customary way is to have it a downward stair step. So like this, but this background is going to be stretched to cover more artwork, so it's going to be on the foundation. All right, so this is a different artwork, and I scaled it to the edges using that's full frame option Command F to fit to comp. All right, and the speed of this, the entity is moving quite quickly with big jumps in its motions. The only way for it to be smoother is if it's reshot more incrementally. But let's say we don't have time to do that, and it is what it is. It looks pretty cool. It does have a shadow, but the background seems a much more saturated, evenly lit green. And I'm not concerned at all about the little wrinkles. Those will just disappear. Just with the overall speed, I guess the first step is, do you want to scale the time? I think it jumps around a lot, but that's kind of its nature, or maybe go with it. So I'll even make it more poppy like that by extending the time. So I'm going to the time and time stretch. Here I'm going to make it longer, and the other one I made it slightly shorter. I'm going to put it 200. So I'm going to double the length of it, and let's do I, B, O, N, 0. Playing the range slider. This is what we have. It's looking kind of cool. So yeah, just rolling with the kind of jerkiness of it, of how it looks, because it's a really seductive object. And I like how it stops and it wiggles, that's little Ethernet antenna at the end like that. And when we look at it, we're going to see how well it just separates visually. Any metallic object right here, you can see at the end of that little mini cord, it's made of chrome. It's going to pick up some of the green areas that are reflective. Often it could be done in a production where those are painted black so it doesn't pick up something. It will be okay. I think it's going to separate a little better. Let's give it a try. So we're going to color range, and we're going to drag it to the layer. All right, and here with the color range preview window, just select broad area of the green and adding to it. Just clicking anywhere you see green. See it picking up a little here. You can see how some of the green darker is reflected in it, but if you click the shadow, well, that disappear too. Let's drag the background through it so we can see what's going on. Okay, yeah, we have some biting into the reflective parts of the chords. Let's stop there and go to the layer and start to adjust the minimum and maximum values of the range. See what we can do. See, we can bring some of those back, but some of the background comes back. Okay, let's go full 255 on the max LYR. And then for the max AUG, let's go. Yeah, we're going to get this close. And then just go back to the minimum LYR and push that all the way to the minimum. Okay. So what we got. Okay, that fared much better, I think, because some of them are reflecting, as you can see, but it has a little bit of isolation of color and space compared to the other one. Yeah, I tried to get rid of the shadow and it's biting in here. Here's the compromise you would want to set. Like, okay, allow that a little bit to happen and just what looks aesthetically a little better. For this project and the first time you're using After Effects with the stop motion entity, let's just be flexible on those rules. It's not really a rule, just find a balance that looks good for your project. Okay, so we're going to stop right about there with the adjustments, and I know that could be a lot improved, but we're going to accept that as our solution balance for it. Before we move on to other things, we're going to actually look at another tool which I mentioned first. It's a mask or pen tool, and let's say if we have more time to do custom cutouts and mats of things, we can make something look as perfect as possible. In fact, it could be someone's entire job is spending frame by frame trying to mask something out that has no green screen at all, or something that wasn't shot originally for that purpose. It's laborious, but if it's just a small sequence of frames, it might not be too bad and worth your while to at least know this tool. Now we're going to repeat this layer, and just by duplicating it, and you should have heard that already from a previous class, but you had to just Command D, select a layer you want to copy. Command D, it's going to duplicate that layer, and you can stretch it, and whatever effects it had on it, it's going to copy that over as well. So we have this layer here. I'm going to work over here for a second. Let's actually take off the color range that we did on this duplicated layer and look at it like this, how it was before, but with the double timing. Okay, using a different tool, we're going to use a pen tool. It's possible to perfectly cut out this and show its background and foreground distinct. So it's using the pen tool. So here, right here, this tool, okay, right there, this tool, pen tool, or hitting G as in giraffe. And then with this, I'll just do a quick one. If you just draw, now you have to have that layer selected, which layer you're drawing the mask on. So if you click with the pen tool, I'm just doing a quick one and encircling this entity, and then click on its very last point and it'll change to an O to complete that loop. Well, it's going to then isolate perfectly whatever's inside there. Now if you wanted to, you could go and click all around all this detail if you wanted to, and that would take forever, but there's some people who do that for small bits of time in order to make a perfect mask. And in addition, you're going to have that animate and move as the entity or actor or whatever is moving. So let's, of course we're not going to do that, but I'm just going to show you. If I hit the layer and hit M, I'll see here there's a mask that was put on it. You can see, you can say add or subtract if you want to reverse, make it like a hole. Also, there's more detail in the mask here. There's mask path, mask feather, and if I increase, here's my creative alternative. If I increase the feather for the background like this, what if I did something like this to make it look like it's glowing? Instead of going into every part of the detail and moving it, just add a lot of feather. Okay, and for mask path, if I click the hourglass, then, and I go to a different part of the animation, here I'm going to move it, find where the entity is, and you see down here it's setting keys. So it's moving the mask, catching up. Well, let's do it here. This is the part we're looking at, and we can adjust it here. We're moving the whole mask around, and if you want to move just the single points of the mask, you can do that too. Move it here and resize the shape of that blob, and it is recording the shape as a key here. It's recording all that data. So let's go to a different part, and let's maybe move the whole mask over, and here we're going to click on mask path. on that side. So we grab, if we click that part of the name, now it's going to move the whole mask. If we want to just move a point of it, we can click off here in the timeline and then back on the layer, and then it's going to just move one point at a time. It's a little bit tricky. Again, if you just want to move one point at a time, select it through the layer. If you want to move the whole mask, select it through here, the source name, and then move the whole mask. In either case, any movement's getting recorded. Okay. So I'm going to just go through that. You could probably see my strategy here is to roll with an experimental solution to maybe make it look like it's glowing. If I wanted to do my own creative mask on it instead of using color separation, and then it really doesn't matter what your background is. You just have to keep it non-distracting and solid. Okay, these also have handles on them if you really wanted to do custom detail, but if you have just a short little piece you want to do this to, maybe you can get into a lot more detail. But I'm almost done chasing this around with my mask just to show you a demo of how it's moving. It's starting to look kind of cool glowing up there in the sky anyhow. And anyway, there are trackers in After Effects that can track mats, that can track camera movement, that can track two elements to each other that you could use. Some of it works out really easily and fun and well, and sometimes if there's a little bit of an anomaly, it causes a lot of problems. So anyway, I just handed this because it was quick enough and short enough that I have this mask and you can see it chasing it around. And it might be a creative option in using an experimental, maybe not for professional work that had an intent to be cut out crisply. I just wanted to give you some tools for flexibility here. So anyhow, I wanted to show you the pen tool, how it works. If you have a part of green coming in that you want to mask out, you can imagine using this pen tool and drawing around anything as a kind of a garbage mat to rid things that you don't want in the shot, as well as things as you want in the shot. So that's the very useful nature of the pen tool. Okay, let's go more to art direction now. Going back to timeline, if you hit U, you can collapse any of the frames if it has things open here. Of course, we could have put keys on more things and that would pop open. If you want to close those, you hit U, timeline, to frame it better. So we can see our layers at a good glance here. And we just have some stuff we want to work with, and we're going to turn this into a 20 frame, sorry about that, a 20-second animation. And this is getting to be more the fun part now, is how we're going to duplicate, we're going to pre-comp, we're going to add some color, some changes to everything. I'm just going to go in a rather random progression of adding things on top of other things. Now that we have transparencies cut, what if I just go to this part right here, as imperfect as our color key and our operation was here in the color range, we're going to go with it, and just above this layer I'm going to duplicate it, and it's a good idea maybe to give color here to separate, what layers are what, just visually. So I'm going to give this an orange distinction. All right, and even if that gets pre-comped, I can carry this color through it. It helps with visual organization, and we can see that it's right on top of each other, no change. But if I right click and I say time, and let's make, remember we made this 80, we're going to make that even shorter. Let's make it 60 and drag it like in the middle. Now we're going to see some kind of compounding of the images on top of each other. Also, what if I gave it a little bit of a rotation, so it's happening at the top of the frame instead of the bottom? I'm going to go R on that orange layer for rotation, and if I put in here 180 for the rotation, then I have the object's dancing at the top of the frame. And it's not perfectly symmetrical because I changed the speed. I want to avoid perfect. I don't want it to seem like it's cut and paste so readily. So that's why I'm changing the speed on it to give it a slightly different feel. Also, I don't want it to pop in. You see how it's going here and it's going to just pop on the screen like that in the top? I want to fade that in. So if I hit T, I just go about 5% in, hit T, then opacity, click 100%, and then hit I to the beginning of the frame and put that on 0. Then it fades in the opacity like that. And I'm going to do the same thing to the end. I'm going to fade it out so it doesn't pop off. Okay. Now I can duplicate it again. And this time I'm going to make it a little bit longer. Okay, time stretches between the two. 60 and 80. Now I'm going to put 90. And I get kind of an in-between range here. Okay, now we can see that spilling over a little bit in the edge. We can move these aside and give more room. Here it's kind of like building a quilt. We're going to make space for it, or we could go back into transform time stretch. Split the difference in sizes, maybe put 50 between 60 and 80, and then it puts it at this size. Split the difference between 60 and 80 and put 70. Right there is an alternative. And if you hit T, it's going to inherit those transparency opacity changes. So that's quite nice. So we duplicated it. And why don't we go with 70, fitting in there, nesting well, and rotating that maybe to the side, like to here, where you put in maybe 280 on this side. And let's try one more for the other frame. So here I'll go with duplicating it first, of course, then right click, time. Here I'll go with a time stretch of 50. And we got a full kind of range of speeds, all with that inherited opacity transparency move. And this is, we got to rotate that too, huh? So we're going to rotate that to the other side. Let's put in 90. And then we have all four sides being active with animation. Let's just look what we have from N, B, O, N. Interesting dance going on with all these objects. All right, so this is maybe the first part of art direction is duplication and repetition, how we're going to loop things, where we're going to place them on the screen. We can see some anomalies with the color range that could have been improved, but we can always mask those out if we like. All right, so let's try to get the activity a little more toward the center, but before we do that, we'll do other art direction topics as well, and that is changing the color. And we can talk about the depth a little bit later too. So to make these seem like they're not as copy-pasted, let's give them a different color signature. So here, if I go into effects and presets and type color, just like in color range, I'm going to get a lot of color correction stuff. So I have this one color balance, which I like to use, and let's just try it on the very bottom one. And with it, and the color changes. Now if I drag it on the very bottom one, what's going to happen is, because there's already a color range on it, it may compromise the original mask. You can see this one it is. So if I had a color range change there, it might affect the mask as well. So that's something to be careful about, and it's a reason why we use something called pre-comp, which I'll show you in a minute. Well, let's keep the color range the same on this one. Let's try here. We're going to do a different one, different color balance, that is. Do a different color balance for each one. See how it does change or it doesn't change. It's the one up here now. Okay. There's also one called tint if we just want to simplify the colors into two. Just type tint and then you can drag tint to the layer and it turns it black and white, but then you can change. You can blend and change more like a red hue. Like that or so. And it's not really affecting the color range because it's a different set of colors. That's not affecting the background very much. And it's also listed under, in a stack, it's listed under the color range. And another way to prevent one effect from ruining or hurting another effect, if it was tampering with it too bad, is to do a pre-comp. And a pre-comp has a number of very useful means. Let me do a couple of these different colors and I'll show you a pre-comp. Okay, there I played with putting tints on all the different layers differently and kept the foundation layer the same. Alright, now if I want to do more work to it over all those 4 layers and I don't want to mess with anything that's already an effect on it, I can grab these layers, these 4 layers, select them all and go to Layer, Create Pre-Comp. And it's on the bottom of the layer. I know you can't see that, but it's Layer in the menu of After Effects, of course, and then Pre-Compose. And this pops up, and just make sure it says Move All Attributes to the new composition, and you can name it Entities. And OK, and it creates a new layer, and if you double click on it, all those layers are still there. They're just packed in a suitcase, as it were, inside there, and you can then individually affect those. And that pops up as a new tab, and if you close that, you're back to the main My Movie comp. Again, double click on that pre-comp, and it's like looking inside the suitcase of all the things packed into it. Okay, now the good thing about this is that you can put different color effects on the whole thing, or maybe you could back up and just do a couple of them, and it chooses, you can choose, that is, however you structure the pre-comps into what it's going to affect. Like if you do these two, put these two in a pre-comp, right, and then these two in a different pre-comp, and again you're going to Layer, Pre-Compose, put those in, and that goes in here. And now you could make that one a different color from this, or change it, or add any of these other effects in it. It's up to you how you structure that. It's like hierarchical. Alright, say you want to put a color balance on just the one pre-comp at the top and affect only what's going on in that layer, make it more blue or something. And of course you can animate any of these. And it's affecting 2 animations at once, 2 different layers, these 2 that are inside here, 1, 2. And this is how you can use pre-comps to structure effects and actions. And on this one, you could put a unique kind of color on it, or color effect, or whatever you like. Probably not that one, but you could put a color balance. And changing those values to make them brighter if you need, and animating that over time by clicking the stopwatch, and they could change colors over time. And it's not going to affect the original color range chroma key because it's been pre-comped. So you can see it changing unilaterally. Alright, so you get the effect of that, and what you could just build on now, and it's so fun, is that you can make a pre-comp out of pre-comps. So you have those and pre-comp those together. But before I do, I'm just going to build a bit more with duplication. Before I create another pre-comp, let's just have the separation of these 2 and create 2 more. And I could right click time and change that time to be a little bit different. Time factor, let's put in like 55, something in between these values. Let's do another one, duplicate, and color this time stretch. Let's go maybe 75 and mix that in with everything else. We also know they're fading out, right? Because we have that original transparency fade in those. And we could take these two, the ones we just made, in duplicates and pre-comp those. Okay, and try scaling that down to fill in the center a little bit. Maybe a little rotation to add some stagger to it. Okay, and let's try duplicating that again. Just the one we made, that is. And then time stretch that to, let's put it back on 80. Okay. Or whatever you choose to make it shorter or longer. And then we can scale that down to more the center. Maybe give that a little rotation. Okay, so we're seeing the variety of that, and let's do a little play of that range. Hitting 0 to preload and play. Okay, here's the wild result of that. And whatever you do, try to centralize your entity. Anything happening in this flurry here, make sure you are not flying off the edges of the screen too much, and you're centralizing the activity and the direction, the art direction of your placement is rather perspectival, center, organized. Okay, that's what we have so far. It's experimental collection combination. Okay, we're going to do more art direction. We're going to compound the next shot with that big rolling wire ball into this and talk about more things. Okay, with this, let's stop playing it. As I mentioned, you can create pre-comps or pre-comps. So pre-compose that now into just one. And remember, you can get at all this by just double-clicking, double-clicking, double-clicking. You get all the pre-comps that are inside, and they display on their own tabs here, which if you delete, they don't go away. They're there. In fact, in your project, you can see the list of pre-comps as well. 1, 2, 3, 4, the different ones we created. But here we have a massive pre-comp of this one, and yeah, if we wanted to, we could just duplicate that again and do another one and another one. We could just scale this until it's crazy. Maybe give it a little rotation and just keep doing it until, I don't know, until it crashes, which won't. See how long it would be. It'd be interesting, but always save. That would be a good idea for me. Again, I'm saying we're trying to centralize the work, so try to fill up the center of the space. If you have entity parts which are dispersed like this, try to fit it all more collecting in the middle. These color range choices I can make. Right, I could key, and having the colors change over the animation would be real fun. And you can affect pre-comp by pre-comp that way. I didn't mention before, but any changes on keys, this is just on color balance, are also stored in the layer here under timeline. If you hit U, you see everything that I set up here also could be set down here. See, with any color changes to a layer, see that one way and back, that's changing. Right, and I'm keying that so it changes over time. Its changes are stored as a keyframe right here in the layer. That if you hit U, you can expose U will expose any keyframe on it. I believe it's E that exposes any effect. If it has an effect, but it shows up as a little black dot, hard to see. So then you pop that open color balance and you see more, or you could just hit U and see them all much quicker all at once, or any keys on there. So this is where it's really fun. You can get into the painterly composition aspects of it. And I said we're going to move on to this one, but I want to point out one other thing about art direction, and that could be depth of where you look. You can give the illusion of things in the front looking closer to you, maybe like right in your face and out of focus, because we can use blur to give the illusion of depth. Of course, we can use real cameras and After Effects and have that give the sense of depth, but a very fast and easy way is just to organize things in pre-comps like we have. And yeah, we can probably give that an orange again to give it, when you get a lot of layers it might get confusing, so this color coding really helps. If you pre-comp it, it just gives a blank new color, which you can change it, or should have. But anyway, let's say if this layer right here is at the top, we can solo it here to see, okay, that's the back layer, so maybe this should be put down here. Okay, and what's this layer? We look and we solo it. Okay, that's the middle layer. This layer should be the back layer. Okay, that's the front layer, so this one should be on the top, so we're going to come up. You can see, drag that line to the top, and then now that's on the top. And this one, we solo it, that should be on the bottom, so we're going to drag that one on the bottom like here. Okay, now we could have this layer in front be a little bit blurry. If we can type in here in Effects Presets, Spyglass, Blur, we can see the different types of a blur. There's motion blur, and I'll use just the Gaussian blur right here. I'm going to drag and just drop right on the top layer that's closest to us, and then in blurriness we put that up, and so the stuff that is right here kind of close to us is blurry, and the stuff in the middle is sharp, and then the stuff that's farthest away here, that stuff is going to be, let's make that, well, we can have a rack focus illusion, we can make that blurry too. So put in the Gaussian blur here, and that'll make the middle sharp. And let's see what that looked like in effect. So that blur definitely slowed down the preview a little bit, so just beware when you're using this, and save off. And there are other faster blurs. I think the smart blur is a little bit faster, and other types of blurs cost even more time, so you might experiment with that. Oh yeah, there's a fast blur right here as well. It may be a little bit quicker. So here's everything together, and as previewed, you can see that kind of illusion that the ones closer to us or the one, the top layer is the closest one to us in scale. Also using the illusion of blur. It's a form of spatial art direction we're talking about, as well as color, as well as the organization of pre-comps to be able to affect what we want individually. I'm also going to change the color of the background a little bit. I think it's a little bit distracting. Again, you don't have to have a background of yours for this part of the Part 2 project. It's just to differentiate your entity from empty space behind it. But maybe it's better to use black, but just make sure it's not distracting or hiding the details. Here I just give the background a little color balance to complement and not distract away from some of the colors in the entity, just as a visual aid of seeing them. Okay, now if I like to keep things simple before we move on to this part over here is to pre-comp the orange ones. I gave that an orange color. Okay, now we can look at some of this stuff bouncing around. And let's say this first part, let's see, it's overlapping a little bit. This first part here was the color key background removal with color range, and this next part was the glowing chasing matte. That's cool. Let's bring these two together, overlap on each other, and let's kind of let's use rotation and have this complement the other side of it, something like that, just eyeballing. Now the problem is if we're getting this edge a little bit, would want to go back to the mask copied over as well, and you know, we don't want that edge, so we want to make sure our mask is, or maybe the feather is too high or something. Just try to prevent the visibility of that edge as this one flies around because it's rotated differently. It's no big deal for this demo, but if it happens in yours and it's unsightly, annoying, you could just go back in the mask and adjust this so it doesn't go off like that on the edge, and fix a point or two there. Alright, now if I want to adjust the color on here, the one that's with the mask, I probably should pre-comp it right away, because if I start adjusting color here, well, let me back up again. I meant the one, not the one with the mask, but the one right here has a color range on it, right? So like the other one, if I adjust the color range, if I put some tint on it, maybe it would be okay, but some other color range, it might start to affect the way the transparency worked on the color range. So if I pre-comp this right away, this layer, see something which is which, that one, then I can put any color effect on it I like, and it's not going to affect the original chroma key. Alright, and I'm going to color these guys blue so it differentiates stuff. Okay, now with this pre-comp layer, I'm going to give it a little bit of a color change, our direction push. Okay, just use color balance to make it a little more pink to maybe match the sunset. And then this one, also make that layer blue. This green is obviously the green screen, so maybe to give it a different or other color for its illusion of a glow, right? There's also this one called change color under color correction. There's change to color and change color. If I use change color, drop it over this. If I pick that green and I can change its glow. You have a tolerance. Now you can give that a more ethereal, alien looking presence there. And change to color could work similarly if you want to swap out one color for another. Yeah, something like that. So it's like the battle of these two entities coming down from space, fighting it out. Some extraterrestrial war. But yeah, where it comes in this edge showing here, it's a little bit annoying and distracting. It would be great to, you could even add a mask on top of a mask if you want on the pre-comp and mask that edge out where it's popping up, or you can go back to the original mask right here and move that so you're not seeing that distracting edge. That's also why I said when you animate your entity stop motion, make sure you centralize it. Don't put your entity off to the edges. This is precisely why. And you're seeing that you'll have to do more work to, in some process, to fix that if you're doing an operation like this. Anyway, it's no big deal. Okay, I'm going to add a third entity here by duplicating this layer right here. Just duplicate this top layer. And I'm going to change the time on it a little bit. Time stretch, and I'll make that, well, it's 200 to begin with. Let's make it 180, let's say. And I'm going to do the fade at the edges too before I forget. T to change the opacity from 0 to 1. from 100% here to at the end 0 and a 0, so it fades on instead of pops on. And then I could do a little bit of a rotation as well. Well, I'm showing you this for some other tools. Like, of course, all along the way, we could have been saving keys on scale, position, and rotation. Anything for scale is S. You put it here. You can you can animate the scale over time. P is for position, of course, animating position over time, and R for rotation, etc. So it creates, of course, keys on the timeline I'm sure you've used before. But one thing I'm going to use here that I'm not sure if you've tried yet is, let's see, if you ever want to change the mat there and stuff that's coming out, you can do that. Anyway, what I want to try here is blending layers. Maybe you've used them in Photoshop. They're same here in AfterEffects. Fussing now with that edge. Okay, so right now it's just pixel on top of pixel. It's like painting right on top of the painting under it. But you can blend them together here in blending modes right there. So under the mode, normal is just painting on top of other pixel. Here you can choose any of these. These are blending the pixels together. It's not the same thing as transparency. If we did transparency, hit T, and we change its opacity, now we're looking at this one right here, right? We can see it fade. So we can see what is underneath artwork, but it's not the same thing as blending it through one of these. So if we hit multiply, we see how that's blended. It's darkened into the background, and we see some of the overlap here. And the ones on top generally darken, and the ones on bottom generally brighten up. That's hard mix. And the one in the middle, overlay, tries to keep the pixels kind of neutral, and it has a semi-transparent. It all depends on what the background is, because if there were no background, you turn this off, that would seem normal again. It has to do with mixing the pixels and how it mixes the pixels. And you can really get a nice composition if you experiment a little with this sometimes. Okay, so that is what I wanted to show you of how you possibly could mix multiple layers together. Soft light. You don't want too much presence of entities that it gets so distracting. And this is part of art direction, is where do you want the viewer to look? What's the most important activity that's going on here? There's overlay, some possible. And so let's leave it on overlay. So it's kind of like a whisper happening on top, and it's not distracting from the two. Maybe it's playing as some kind of a cosmic referee to these two fighting in the middle. All right, we've come a long way. Now, what we're going to do is, you guessed it, pre-comp these. It's really good to get in the habit of color coding things, so I'll stick to that. I could choose to duplicate this and mix it with my orange one and get something really complex if I want, right? Because I have that other batch of entities now mixing with this one. That would be kind of cool. But I don't know, one is sort of blocking another. Let's do this where let's just overlap a little bit. I don't need that one actually. I just wanted to show you a possibility. I'm going to keep it a little bit simpler. Less is more with this, at least at this stage. Let's overlap this just a little here. So it's not going to cut to, it's going to fade into it. So I'm going to put, here's my choice. I can stair step up or stair step down. Try to make a decision here. If I say stair step down, I could do this and then have this one fade out, the orange one fade out. Or I could have the blue one on top fade in. Let's stair step down. So I'm going to have this one fade into the blue one. Okay, so I have about 10 seconds. My assignment, your assignment, is 20 seconds, so you can make that up creatively. What you could do is take this business, duplicate it, try to double the length, reorder this. Now color coding it really comes in handy to see what you have. And that we're at 20 frames, like, I'm sorry about that, 20 seconds. Keep saying 20 frames. And you just extend. Once again, you don't need a background for part 2 of the assignment. That is coming later. This is just a filler, but it's maybe nice to have. You can leave your background black. That's, you know, perfectly fine. It just, there may be some contrast issues. This is just fine to turn in if you don't want a background. So note that I'm throwing that in just for visual demo purposes. Okay, so I have something about 20 seconds here. And you could spend the rest of the time even experimenting more with this part. Of course, you pre-comped, you could duplicate this part, you could change its timing ad infinitum, you could just keep changing stuff, adding more and more and more, adding a rotation. You could actually put a rotation key on something, as I mentioned before, like that, so it's rotating over time. By the way, you probably learned this before, but if you grab the keys, right click, go to keyframe assistant and say easy ease, you can ease in and ease out of those frames, so it, you know, the rotation or movement or scale, any position changes don't look too mechanical, so they're going to ease into one shot to another. You know, so let's say you mix this up. Oh, you know, we didn't do a fade here. What we need here, right, is a transparency fade to 0. We forgot to put in that overlap, didn't we? So that's going to fade to 0 so it doesn't pop on. We don't want things popping on and off. It'll be very distracting. So that's cool. And this one didn't need one because the orange one had one. Okay. And we're going to put this maybe here. And it has a need for a different fade in here. All right, we've got quite a busy composition going on, and I've showed you almost everything I wanted to. Let's see what's going on here. It's a little bit of a the artwork doesn't pop in until a little bit later. It's fine. Anyway, we've got to all the issues I want to show you with this first thing. So chroma key reduction, color separation, getting the background out, whether it's green or any color, did that. Duplication, the use of layers, art direction with color. We even used some blur to give the illusion of depth in different parts. And we're using really the structuring strategy of pre-comps to get more and more control and complexity. Of course, we changed the time by right-click time, giving the time stretch differences, and all that stuff. So we are just left with how to deliver this as a final. Make sure you have 20 seconds, which we just about do here in our length. We've learned the range slider, so go to the end of the range and the start of the range, and we're going to render what's in this range. So of course, save your work first. All right, so we're going to use the Adobe Media Encoder, which is in the more recent versions. It's always been there in After Effects, but Add to Render Queue used to be a way to render within After Effects, but the Adobe Media Encoder is a different app and allows you to render outside of After Effects. And that's good because if After Effects crashes, your render will still keep going. All right, so how we do that is just maybe don't have anything selected here, just empty selection. Make sure your range slider is set because it's going to render with it's in the range slider. I have no sound here, by the way, so I'm not worried about that. Anyway, I'm going to go to After Effects, then I'll go to File, Export. I know you can't see that, but it's under File, Export, Add to Adobe Media Encoder. And it's going to take a bit because a new app has to open the Media Encoder, so just give that a bit. I'll just give it a pause. Okay, so that took about 30 seconds to a minute just to open and for this to load in the Media Coder. So this is a different program. It's Adobe Media Coder, and here is our scene here, matching bit rate, it says automatically. Anyway, here is where we can choose our format, the bit rate. This is the codec. It's going to follow, and here's the export output file. So you might have something different from mine, just as long as it's codec that we share. Okay, the things to match are: is it HD? Is it 24 frames a second? It's already set in settings and in your recordings to be that. But for me to watch and others to watch it, it has to be in a format that we can watch. So if I choose QuickTime here, it gives me the options of these, which are going to be the wrong size, or GoPro, yada yada yada. But it has one that says match source rewrap. That should produce an equivalent of what I have here in After Effects. If you don't have that, if you have a PC or different options, the alternatives to use could be MPEG-4. And if it goes MPEG-4, make sure, okay, so this is not the size of MPEG-4. So we can't use MPEG-4 on this one. So we could use, I'm trying to find alternatives in case you don't have the ones that I have. Okay, one is alternative directly from QuickTime is just H.264, which almost everything understands. H.264, and then you can match source or bit rate, and it has a lot of different ones here from the different sizes. So I could go with that one, or I'm going to go with QuickTime. If you said Target or TIFF, these are image sequences. They'll give you 480 individual rendered frames. You don't want that probably at this point. So I'm just going to go with QuickTime and then match source. And I'll find a destination for it. Okay, and click Save. And just the green arrow for the render button to launch the render. And that's going to give you an output preview right down here. All depending on how much stuff you put on there, how many effects, how many layers, if it maybe a lot of blurs or something, this could take longer, or it could take 5 minutes, it could take an hour, it could take several hours depending if you use any of the fancy effects or filters that maybe were in that effects column that I didn't use, or distortions or stuff like that. So I am going to pause it and unpause when finished. And forgot to mention that all the output detail is nicely written in the media encoder. We have the preset, so it's matching the 1920 by 1080. It's 24 per FPS progressive, which is all good, and uncompressed RGB at 8-bit, fine. There's no sound, not to worry. Audio uncompressed, there's nothing there anyway. But if it was, you can change the settings on how it compresses the audio, or it doesn't at all. Oh, and by the way, as it's rendering, it does give a estimate, this remaining time. If you can depend on it, it would be great. But it's really estimating based on how difficult its area it's currently rendering is, and then multiplying that out to the rest. So if you hit a patch that's difficult to render, the estimation will be off. It will be giving you more time than it really is. And then vice versa, if there's an area black or not much going on, it's going to underestimate the time that'll render. So just look at this with kind of a grain of salt, or at least with an error that can swing back and forth. So it says remaining 8 minutes on mine, probably around that. Okay, when the render is done, you get that satisfying After Effects render bling sound and a little check mark that that's rendered. So this is a queue. You can schedule a whole series of things to render and walk away. And even when it's in the queue, After Effects doesn't need to be open, so you can maximize your CPU processing just for the render list. Okay. Okay, so I opened, here's my rendered movie. And this madness that we have so far. Okay, so that's my 20-second cycle. And just as a demo, once again, you don't need to have a background. It could be just black. If it's just something to contrast to make sure none of your entity components are disappearing, you can change that. But we're going to do another assignment where we're going to replace the background. And that's it, really. And this is what you upload.